Since the multiple revelations about Downing Street parties, Rishi Sunak has been notably absent. But he's now been back in front of TV cameras, even if he didn't hang around for long. This interview starts with Sunak being asked whether he believes the Prime Minister.
Of course I do. The Prime Minister set out the truth. Of course I do. The Prime Minister set out his understanding of this matter in Parliament last week, and I'd refer you to his words. As you know, Sue Gray is conducting an inquiry into this matter, and I fully support the Prime Minister's request for patience while that inquiry concludes.
Dominic Cummings and others have said that the Prime Minister was warned this party shouldn't go ahead. If the Prime Minister lied to Parliament, he should resign, shouldn't he?
Well, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals. The ministerial code is clear on these matters. But as you know, Sue Gray is conducting an inquiry into the situation. I think it's right that we allow her to conclude that job.
And you support the Prime Minister unequivocally? Your microphone.
Oh, gosh, thank you.
Dahlia, standing up and walking away is one option when you're asked if you back your boss. Was that a smart move by Rishi Sunak?
Look, if you're going to storm out of an interview, you have to have a clear exit plan. It has to be very dramatic and intentional. You can't get tied up in your mic. It undermines the whole thing. To me, this just makes Rishi Sunak look like chicken shit. It makes him look like someone who is trying to have his cake and eat it, who is angling for the leadership and so is refusing to back Boris Johnson explicitly because he knows that he doesn't want to be associated with what's been happening, but also refusing to speak out against him because he doesn't want to sort of upset the power balance right now within the government. And it's slimy, and it kind of also fits with his general reputation of kind of running away when things get tricky. He was his notorious trips to California when the hospitality industry is collapsing. He is nowhere to be seen during all these whenever the latest scandal comes up. He avoided PMQs last week because this was when Johnson first started coming under fire. But I think that, he is popular enough within the party that it probably doesn't matter that he kind of has this reputation. Although if I was a Tory MP, I would sort of be thinking, or a member of the Conservative Party, I'd be thinking, is this guy really going to hack it as Prime Minister if he walks out of an interview where it's not exactly a massive surprise that a journalist would ask him a question about this? Like, you think that he could have had a sort of pivot answer or some kind of answer to this, just that he could just get out of it rather than making new, if he hadn't stormed out of it, this interview probably wouldn't be news, and it was a fairly predictable question. So whether or not this will end up being a smart move by Sunak, it kind of depends how long people's memory on this will be. I think on the one hand, he'll always have it on his records that he didn't make a stand when the Prime Minister partied as people died. And also, this probably isn't the first time that he found out that this was happening. As we've sort of spoken about, he literally lives next door. Those garden parties happened within earshot of where he lives. He probably, allegedly, we don't know for sure, of course, but it wouldn't surprise me if he had an inkling that this was that these things were going on. All of that could be mobilized against him in either a leadership challenge or in an election. But all in all, I think that memories are very short in politics. And I think that he is enough of a darling of the media that these kind of things will be swept under the rug. They won't matter. And he still has a pretty clear shot of the Tory leadership and of, a fairly easy ride by the media, as we've sort of seen so far.
We're going to talk about the very strong position Sunak finds himself in, quite, exceptionally strong position, actually, because he's far and away the favourite to be the next Tory leader and therefore Prime Minister. And that's because he's popular among MPs. They choose the final two candidates. And then he's also popular among members. They're the people who get the final say, so they choose which of those two candidates wins. And a recent YouGov poll showed nearly half of Tory party members, that's 46%, think that Sunak would be a better leader than Johnson. Only 16% think he would be worse. And crucially, he has the best ratings among all of his competitors for the leadership. It also seems that the electorate still likes the guy. Polling for Channel 4 News in key red wall seats shows that Sunak has a net positivity rating of 22%. For every other leading Conservative, that rating is negative. So there's an enormous gap there between Rishi Sunak and everyone else. So why is Sunak, a former banker, cutting through so well? Well, there's no denying that he's slick, telegenic, difficult word to say, and a good operator. But it's also likely to be because voters see Sunak as the guy who, throughout the pandemic, was reasonably generous with money. He was the person associated with the furlough, most importantly. The reality, though, is that Sunak is not a tax and spend chancellor, but a billionaire and a Thatcherite whose wife, Ashgata Murphy, is reported to be richer than the Queen. Sunak's policy commitments are also pretty right-wing. In last year's budget, Sunak quietly reversed a decision to raise capital gains tax. That was a decision that benefited the wealthy, and it also cost the public sector £14 billion. Sunak is also reported to be planning a range of financial incentives for the wealthiest before the next election, including a 2p cut to income tax, a reduction in inheritance tax, and the scrapping of the highest tax rate. Again, policies that overwhelmingly favour the rich. At the same time, he has attached a health and social care levy to national insurance, and this is a tax which affects workers and especially those on lower incomes. It isn't paid on income from rent or investment, so it doesn't hit Sunak's supremely wealthy friends. Paul Johnson of the Institute for Fiscal Studies described these proposals as indefensible. He also said to introduce the health and social care levy, which essentially only affects workers, then to cut income tax, which also benefits people who receive their income from rent, occupational pensions, and other holdings, discriminates in favour of the wealthy. Now, if you've heard of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, you'll know they're not a particularly left-wing organisation. They're famously at the centre of politics. Of course, discriminating in favour of the wealthy means, for multimillionaire Sunak, discriminating in favour of himself. Dahlia, if Sunak wins a leadership election, do you think he's going to be able to hide his inner Thatcherite all the way up to a general election? That's what seems key to me.
I mean, that depends more on what the opposition does, what social movements, what the Labour Party, what critical media like us do, more than anything to do with Rishi Sunak. I think the question is, will the opposition, will the opposing forces be organised enough, be firm enough to cut through and make it clear that the public know who this person really is? It's going to be very difficult because more than I think anyone else that I can think of right now in politics, Rishi Sunak has been the darling of the media. You know, I don't know if you remember, Michael, when he had that puff piece in the allegedly neutral BBC or the allegedly biased left-wing BBC that literally portrayed him as Superman. You know, I can't think of any other politician recently that has had that kind of coverage. I can think about politicians that have had equally extreme coverage in the opposite direction, but not puff pieces to that extent. So it will take a lot of work to cut through that. But as you've just outlined, we have more than enough data to know exactly who this man is, exactly what his ideology is. And I think it's very important that we don't allow him to claim things, popular things like the furlough scheme as his own. The furlough scheme was not something that is in any way part of or aligned with Rishi Sunak's underlying ideology. His underlying ideology is completely and utterly against the idea of offering people support regardless of whether or not they are able to work. That was literally because the furlough scheme was because his hand was literally forced by a global pandemic and by pressure from the then Labour leadership. Let's not forget that the furlough scheme in its early stages was actually incredibly, for a lot of workers, was really insufficient for self-employed workers, for gig economy workers, for independent contractors. All of these people were left out of that initial furlough package, which just goes to show what Sunak's priorities are. And to me, even if you don't bring the ideological stuff into it, the political stuff into it, that's not a sign of competence. And that's really the kind of a brand that Sunak is trying to portray himself as, which will likely be quite popular given the kind of chaos that Boris Johnson has represented. So really, it is up to us, it is up to the opposing forces, and it's particularly up to the Labour Party to offer a strong and clear voice to cut through what will be an incredibly favourable and fluffy media response, I can presume, to Rishi Sunak becoming leader of the Conservative Party and therefore Prime Minister.